and DPS community. I am Julie Wilkin. I am the new Director of Nursing and Student Health for DPS, new as in last 6 months. So I've been here since December. Today, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk to you about immunizations and how that helps support the health and safety of our families and our students. So this month is National Immunization Awareness Month, which is an annual observance held in August to highlight the importance of vaccines of all ages. Vaccines are the most effective way to prevent infectious and communicable diseases. It gives us the opportunity to bring to the forefront the importance of immunizations and their ability to save lives. Before COVID and since COVID, healthcare professionals have been working extremely hard to promote the safety and efficacy of all vaccines. So, why do we vaccinate? Basically, because vaccines save lives. On time vaccination throughout childhood is essential because it helps provide immunity before children are exposed to the potentially life threatening diseases. Vaccination is the most important thing that we can do to protect ourselves and our children against severe illness. Since vaccines have been introduced, many diseases that used to cause death or disabilities are now gone or rarely seen. Things that we heard back in the day of smallpox, polio, tetanus, those have all been eradicated. Often hear of a few measles cases or diphtheria cases. Those have been reduced by 99% because of vaccines being introduced. So prevention is key. We unvaccinated children are not only at risk of getting themselves sick, but also spreading it to others who are not protected. For example, when we think of immunocompromised individuals who cannot receive vaccines, that is the reason why we choose to get vaccinated so that we can prevent serious illnesses amongst our population. By achieving a high vaccine rate in our district, we are truly protecting the health of the DPS community. So before I talk a little bit about the DPS immunization data, I want a minute to extend how the work gets done in DPS. We have several school nurses that ferociously work year round to support our immunization data. We want to make sure that it is up to date and that we are doing our role in compliancy. We utilize an important immunization team here at DPS that actually hand enter every year, month after month, day after day, manually enter data into our Infinite Campus system. On our 5 required school vaccines, parents either provide us a proof of immunization or they give us an exemption on an annual basis. And that is what is compliant with state law. Parents who are compliant with state law also give us the opportunity to choose whether or not they want to have their students vaccinated. We also report our immunization rates and compliance rates to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment on an annual basis. They do produce these on a public facing website where you can compare district to district, school to school. And if you go to CDPHE's website, you can see the data for the past 5 years and you can compare all the districts to each other. Currently, they are working on updating the 21-22 school year, so that information is not available to the public quite yet. We do report in January, so we should have that data coming up on the website soon. Currently, as of June for our 21-22 school year, we reported a compliancy rate of 91%. 2 years ago, Governor Polis set a state goal, hoping that we would have 95% compliancy across the state. So we are not too far from getting there as of now. So increased immunization rates do matter because we are trying to stay away from outbreaks. Outbreaks are dependent on the immunization rate. A good example of what we just saw with COVID in the last 2 years is where we can utilize this. Outbreaks do lead to burden in our community. Sick students end up missing school, sick teachers miss school, parents of sick kids miss work, and then our most vulnerable population is at further risk for illness. So, what are our resources that we have for our families? We do a lot to support our students and families regarding increased access to immunizations. First, the importance of the school nurse is a valuable asset that our schools have. They have a unique position to support vaccine compliance. They have the knowledge to educate parents and families. They have skills to be culturally competent and sensitive in this matter. And all nurses are truly a trusted professional in the schools that connect with families and students on a daily basis. The process that nurses go through to have compliancy done with families, they often get to know these families and they have a chance to make true connections. We are also very proud of our partnership with Denver Health and Denver Public Health. We have 19 school-based health centers that all provide immunizations at no charge to our DPS students. Denver Public Health and in-school immunization program, we have partners that go to schools that offer all day long vaccine clinics that are also free of charge throughout the school year. And then we also have Shots for Tots clinics that are low price or free vaccines that are offered also throughout the year. So, when promoting immunizations, we are putting students first, their safety and the safety of our community. We believe that vaccines are an important part of our integrity, and we use science as a platform to protect our community against deadly communicable diseases. In a district that is nearly 75% of students of color, we understand that there is some hesitancy and access across the district to access vaccines. Under the lens of cultural sensitivity, we educate to break down barriers for our community and our underserved students. This is something we strive for every day, and this is what we believe brings equity into the equation. We also use community partners to provide access and collaborate with principals to this board and to our community to maintain awareness, availability, compliance with vaccination laws. Are laws that hold us accountable to the public because we know that we need to meet the basic needs and safety and health of our students and our families. That's it. Any questions?
Yeah, Director Wilkins, thank you so much. Appreciate the
Sure.
report, the update. You mentioned 17 locations, is that correct?
19.
19 locations distributed throughout the district. Are they equitably distributed, meaning where there's deep need from some of our families? And then if so, does it include the COVID vaccine yet, or uh, what does it include?
It does include, so they are basically a clinic, just like if you went to the doctor's office. There's a clinic with a mental health provider. Usually there's two different types of providers, sometimes a physician, a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, and they actually see students just like they would see, like if you went to the doctor. They are pretty, I wouldn't say that they're equally distributed across the district, but in years past, as they've built clinic after clinic after clinic, they've looked at areas of high needs and tried to fit that most equitably on where the needs were for the students.
Where could I see a map of those?
It's on our website, but I'd be happy to send it to you too.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to
Sure.
open it up
And
for,
yes, of course, COVID vaccine, they were one of our main providers and helping give the COVID vaccine out.
okay, great. Thank you. I'm
Sure.
going to open it up for my colleagues to ask questions.
Okay.
Vice President Anderson?
Uh, Thank you, one, for the presentation, and two, also, just want to express my gratitude to Team DPS for pushing for immunizations for our staff and pushing it for our children. I got my booster shot the day that it was open for our kids in DPS in January. And so I definitely remember the bright smiles on smiles ish on kids' faces. Some of them didn't have smiles Um, but definitely, they were pumped about making sure that they were safe. And Dr. Moreno, thank you for your leadership in ensuring that DPS was the leader in the state for the fight against COVID. And I hope that, if COVID, I know that people are talking about another fall wave. And so if we can make sure that we are getting these resources out to our communities in alignment with the modified consent decree in various languages so people can have access to this presentation, but also have access to the resources within their communities. I want us to be on top of the wave when it comes, if it comes, for us to defeat the COVID pandemic once again, because DPS rose, we rose above the first time and will continue to do so.
Agreed. Thank you.
Over here, Director Esterman.
Just had a
Sure, you're welcome.
thank you for important. I was curious, if we're satisfied with the governor's.
So again, we want to understand the difference between immunization rate and compliancy rate.
Right.
So to be compliant with state law, you either have to show proof of immunization or an exemption. So technically, every district should be at 100% to be compliant with state law. Um, there's no district across the state that has ever been at 100%. So in the 90s is a pretty good achievable rate, but can we always do better? Yes.
Do we have a
So every year that with legislation, when it changes a little bit and promotes more involvement with the parent, you see a little bit of a drop, which is what we saw last year. So a little bit of drop, it made it a little bit harder for parents to get exemptions. So when that happens, you see a little bit of that compliancy go down and then you see it come back up. So as it comes back up, it's our role as nurses and healthcare professionals to educate and do whatever we can to get out in front of it. And we do help our principals with posting different information, especially the access. I think that we have a great plan here at DPS with our school based health centers in constantly promoting the vaccine awareness. So that is our plan for now. We are continuing to promote and continuing to move that forward. Sure.
Director
Yes,
Quattlebaum, sorry about
thank
that.
you. I would just like to say, while I do appreciate the services that the school-based clinics offer our the student schools, I would really like the opportunity to really give a heartfelt shout out to our school nurses. I know what you guys do. It's tough work.
Thank
It's
you.
important work. And I just want you to know you are appreciated.
Thank you.
We see you.
Thank you. Got about 120 other nurses that will thank you for that too.
Yeah, Vice President Anderson.
Thank you. Is there any plan to require vaccinations amongst our kids? Do we have that is that in the work, but Superintendent Marrero, or I don't know who?
So
best to
by
clarify?
law, there's 5 required vaccines to attend school right now. They continue to talk about COVID and whether COVID will be a required vaccine. I think in due time, once they kind of get through the little guys of that 6 months to 4 years, and they see what happens with that population, because there hasn't been a big uptake in that population of getting vaccinated. So I think when they start to look at what the side effects have been and they've really studied that over the next few years, they most likely will make COVID a required vaccine. Lots of talk about that, but nothing solid yet.
Great, thank you, Director Wilkins.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate your time and
Sure.
okay, all right. A quick thank you and we got to move on to the next item
Okay.
on the agenda. Go right ahead, Director Olson.
Along with the nurses, I'd like to thank all of the office staff who are designated. I think they're designees, right? When the
Delegated.
delegate. I knew it started with a D, and I know that's an extra burden and very stressful. I took that training myself as a teacher to be able to step in and help out.
Great,
So
thank you.
thank you.
Yes, with the national nursing shortage going, we are depending on our office staff and other professionals in the building to be trained and delegated under the nurse's license. Okay.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night. Okay, up next we have a special presentation coming from Richard Pagel, the Denver Public Schools Foundation. Welcome, Richard, President and CEO of the Denver Public Schools Foundation.
So, can you hear me?
Get a little bit closer to the mic, Richard.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to present to you this afternoon. As my previous colleague here, I also started with the DPS Foundation 6 months ago. So I'm a relatively new Denverite and really be proud of it. So thanks again for having me here. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows the role of the Denver Public Schools Foundation. And as the strategic partner for DPS, we believe that when our students are thriving, so does our district and our city. Together with the community and our supporters, we work towards where all students graduate ready to lead a successful life. And we invest in our students in three ways. The first really is invest in their accelerating the progress of their performance, both in school and out of school. Uh, we do have a portfolio that really looks into their academic growth, social emotional learning, extracurricular activities. We also connect the community to our classrooms through volunteer efforts, through having the community engage in school life and being part of it and being connected. And then the third role we play really is inspiring confidence among our community members in the promise of public education. And as you may be aware, there's a lot of questions and apprehension about what's going on in our public schools, and it is our role. We do see it as our role to translate the roadmap, for example, the strategic roadmap, so that people can understand not only what the district is doing, but what the community ought to be doing in order to make sure all of our students, our teachers, our educators, our principals are successful in what they do. In the past year, we have invested over $5.5 million in a lot of classroom, school-based efforts serving both our students and our educators in various means and ways. One portfolio that we have launched last year is the $1 Million Fund, and 8 schools were recipients of an average of about $139,000 each to really initiate, implement innovative practices that are school-wide, ranging from using community gardens as a resource for social emotional learning and community collaboration, looking at, for example, Johnson's Elementary's developing an anti-racist teaching block using science and social studies as a way to make sure that there's an experience and perspective of students are incorporated into the teaching and learning experience. We have about 2,800 students impacted by this investment across 8 schools. We also have, since 2007, an A to Z fund that really goes directly to classrooms. About 123 grants to or grants to 123 schools were made, totaling 202,000, an average of about $1,700 to $2,000 each, where teachers and students were able to conduct innovative practices anywhere from you know, looking at improving literacy to improving math skills or even improving peer interaction in a multicultural fashion. We also have special initiatives that either align with Dr. Marrero's priorities or priorities that have been introduced to us by specific donors. So one of these is after school and the Lights On After School initiative, where over 35 schools benefited. Over 10,000 students participate in after school programs through Discovery Link that DPS Foundation has invested in. We also invest in face centers, especially the face center at the village at Creative Learning Academy, which has been part of the pilot of the community hubs that Dr. Marrero has envisioned across all 6 regions of the district that the DPS Foundation has fully embraced and is doing everything in our power to make sure that that is a reality in the next year. We also invested in career and college success, which was formerly Career Connect, which benefits over 18,600 students. Um, we also have a variety of events where community can come together and celebrate both the achievements and opportunities that are presented in our public schools. I've met most of you at the gala last April, so thank you so much for participating in that. The gala has raised over 800,000 to support additional investments in all of these portfolios that I mentioned. We also held Films for the Future this past March, which raised the curtain on LGBTQ issues among our student populations and really put up front in terms of the challenges and the supports that they need in order to take advantage of learning in our schools, but also develop this sense of belonging um, in our public schools. And most recently, not just 2 weeks ago, we held a back to class bash where several companies and several individuals participated in making sure that we are preparing a couple of our schools, elementary schools, both on the north and the south region, be prepared for class opening. So they helped, paint the school, paint the playgrounds, make sure that the surroundings and the yards are clean. Um, and 4 hours that afternoon, that morning, on a Friday morning, really dealt with the heat of the sun, but to make sure that both of those schools are ready for the school year. Those are just examples of how we connect the community to their public schools and become proud of it that they did something to help out. And moving forward, um, basically we want people to start believing in the strategic roadmap, and so part of our role now is translating those priorities into how would our public schools look differently when both the district and the community are partnering together to make sure that all of our schools are improving and all of our educators are finding their work fulfilling in our school district. We are also looking at a back to school campaign as we speak to make sure that we have the resources to provide to our students and educators as they start um, this new school year. In mid-September, we will be launching a new framework for looking at our school partnerships program, and we are calling this Community Leads and Student Succeeds. It's our class framework that brings together the private sector to partner with a cohort of schools um, to make sure that all of the support needs from after school programs to social emotional learning to parent engagement supports and principal and teacher leadership opportunities are provided to everyone in a school so that and using tapping into private dollars, private resources, and in-kind contributions to make sure that that school is lifted, that student performance is improved, that retention of principals and teachers are high, and that overall that we are proud of how these schools are performing. We are looking at launching this with a cohort of 15 to 20 schools, depending on how many companies and major individuals are able to support number of schools. But we're also looking down the road into replicating this and having a second cohort of 20 schools within 3 years. And then maybe within 6 years, have a third cohort, which would present a critical mass of schools having these kinds of supports from the private sector. My vision for that is at least 60% of our public schools have these kinds of partnerships that provide these opportunities, not just for our students, but for also our educators. Um, so that's just a summary of what we've been able to accomplish this past year and what we're able to accomplish, hopefully this coming school year. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Richard. I have a couple of questions. What would you share with us if there's an increase or a higher interest from other major contributors and donors, corporations, businesses that are looking to DPS Foundation and wanting to partner and participate? And as you think about that, how, as you all are looking at the A to Z fund and other programming that you have, how do you look at, or is there a formula that the board is looking at on distributing the funding equitably throughout the district? So if you could share a little bit more.
Sure. In terms of investor interest, a lot of people are curious and asking us questions around Dr. Marr's vision. Um, People are, the good news is people are willing to support our public schools in whatever way they can. From the $5 contributor to corporations that are looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. Uh, the question, however, is how do we know it's making a difference? So one of the things that we are really focused on is being data centered and outcomes driven. So all of these initiatives that I've outlined for you, from our $1 million fund to our A to Z fund to our forthcoming class framework, we're really relying on DPS to share with us data, aggregated data at a school level, to make sure that as people invest in these initiatives, that we can tell them that yes, the needle is indeed moving, and the more the needle moves with these investments, the more likely they will invest a lot of more resources, both financial and in kind. Um, in terms of A to Z fund, uh, since since the beginning in 2007, about 1,743 grants were made. This last round, 120 schools, almost everybody who applied for a grant under A to Z fund was granted some level of funding. Probably not to the extent of the full amount that they requested, but almost every application was funded. And I would say, um, you know, in this past year, about 19 of that 123 were provided to charter schools, grants to charter schools, and the rest were into traditionally run district schools. But since 2007, of that 1,700, about 7% were provided to charter schools. Uh, One of the things that we would love support on is really spreading the information around to make sure that a lot more schools are aware of this opportunity, to make sure that there are resources in their classrooms. So
Great. Let me open it up to my colleagues for questions. Director Lindsay.
So who is doing the anti-racism training? And how long does the training last, or how does it work?
I don't have a specific, but that was the anti-racist teaching block is being done at Johnson Elementary, and so we can provide you with more details on that in terms of how that's being rolled out. That started this last school year, so this would be their second school year of doing that, and we can provide more details.
Okay, thank you.
Did I see a hand over here, Director Olson?
Yes, and I believe the first year it was done by our own DPS staff. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm looking at Chief of Staff State, and I believe that our equity department worked with the foundation. But first of all, Mr. Togli, I'd like to just thank you for all of your hard work, and to your board of directors and to the donors who have given so much money. I think Vice President Anderson will remember the day that he and I were passing out food to the adults and we were told we couldn't, and then the DPS Foundation stepped up and said, no, we'll cover the adults during the pandemic. And so DPS Foundation fed the city of Denver during the pandemic, and for that I will always be grateful. I'm also
Thank you.
grateful for the summer reading list that you gave me. For those of you who don't know, along with his plan and supporting Dr. Marrero, he's asked all of the board to read How Children Succeed by Paul Tuff, Mindset by Carol Dweck, The Future of Smart by Yelka Josie Hansen, and Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And that was my summer reading list. So thank you very much for all you do.
Welcome.
And Vice President Anderson? Go right ahead, Director Balderman.
Thank you. Is this working? There we go. You mentioned Dr. Morero's strategic plan, or strategic roadmap, which I really appreciated. And one of the things I always get concerned about with grants is sometimes they can get schools to not focus on the bigger mission of the district as a whole. So when thanks so much. Maybe this is a question for Dr. Morero, but you started to talk about it, but what kind of efforts are being done to align these grants with supporting that strategic roadmap?
I'm glad you answered that because just before our presentation, the executive leadership team, and I want to acknowledge Ashley Muramoto, who is our vice president for communications and marketing. We just spent about an hour and a half going through the strategic roadmap, key components, and aligning it with our new framework around academic growth. So within our framework, there's four areas that we are looking at, making sure that the needles move. The first one is on academic growth. Second is on life skills and social emotional learning. Third is family and parent engagement and involvement and advocacy of their children's education. And then the third is principal and teacher education leadership. So when we look at all of those four components against the strategic roadmap, we're able to draw straight lines in terms of, with this partnership with each school, how are we moving the agenda forward for DPS Thrives with specific metrics and specific measures that is available within DPS. So there's clear alignment there. And one of the things that we want to basically promote is the community's role in making sure that the plan or the roadmap is successful. This is not just something that DPS will have to shoulder by ourselves, but this is something that needs to be done in collaboration with the community. And we want to make sure that the community is very clear about its role and responsibility to make sure that we reach all of our benchmarks.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Vice President Anderson?
Thank you. I have a series of questions. So one, what are you learning from the data thus far? Two, what parts of the data are informing how they pursue the results? Three, what is the company C-suite makeup? So those are my three questions for now.
In terms of what we're learning, or at least what I'm personally learning so far, is that although, we need to demystify the fact that the DPS isn't performing well. It is actually performing well compared to other districts, both within the state and with other districts of our size and student population. We still have a long ways to go in terms of the performance of students of color and minority students. But that is not unique to Denver. There are best practices, as Dr. Olson has shared. There's research been done that if we all put together what has been conducted in terms of research and evidence-based strategies, that we can actually improve the performance of students regardless of race or where they live or how much their families earn. So I'm learning a lot of that. The data shows that the pandemic has hit us very hard, but it's also showing that a lot of the efforts, especially in this past year where students came back, are working, and so we're proud of that. And in terms of the organization C-suite, so who's the leadership team at the foundation? In addition to Ashley, who's our VP of Communications and Marketing, we also have Sarah Hazel, who is our Vice President for Development. And I just recently promoted Tracy Brooks to Manager of Operations. So the four of us basically make up the leadership team of the foundation.
And I heard the term investor investments, something around investors. Could you expand on that for me?
Yeah, we're trying to now move away from this language of donors to investors because we want to make sure that every dollar provided to the foundation that goes into the district is seen as an investment in our students, and that every major contributor and every, whether it's a contribution of $5 or 50,000 or 500,000, that all of these investors are expecting a return on investment through increases in student performance, increases in teacher retention, increases in school performance, better culture, better social emotional learning quotients, better, higher levels of family engagement and higher levels of advocacy for students when it comes to, and this is a personal agenda of mine, that there are so much opportunities in Denver, yet very few people know how to navigate that landscape. I would get at least 2 or 3 calls from people or emails about what's the best after school program, or where can I find scholarship programs for my students. Uh, and I think we can actually take on the role of helping through these investments, helping our families become better attuned to what's available here in the community and access it. Uh, so this notion of, if you invest in this kind of awareness building process, or coaching families on how to take advantage of these opportunities, we can see the needle move in terms of a lot more people being able to take advantage of what's available here.
Richard, we have a few more minutes, and then we're going to squeeze in a couple of questions. Uh, no, okay. Dr. Marrero, go ahead.
Not a question. If I can annex a little bit more to your response, Mr. Tagley, to Director Balderman's question about alignment. So beautifully said. And in terms of leadership, you, sir, as the CEO and president, serve on my district leadership team. So that keeps you in the room when we're making decisions, but also allows it easier for you and I to engage in terms of alignment of resources. And you've been incredible in that regard.
Thank you.
Also, an annexation to the strategic roadmap is 2 pages of your framework and, I guess, the how are we plan to accomplish our goals. So there's a new version out of our strategic roadmap, which is all the same content plus 2 pages, which is courtesy of the foundation. So thank you for that. And in terms of benchmarks, and I know I'm going to get into this when I present to the board and to the public regarding the roadmap, the benchmarks and the milestones have been provided thanks to you as a board, right? So as you saw on the roadmap, we have our end statements that are aligned to the goals and expectations of the strategic roadmap. And those are the best and most appropriate benchmarks, because if we hit the ends, then not only are we having annual progress, but we'll get to where we hope to get, and we will get in 2026, thanks to you all.
Great, thank you. Thank you, President Richard Tagle, and your Executive Manager, Tracy Brooks. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Up next, we have Miss Nadia Madan Morrow. Please, Nadia, if I pronounce that incorrectly, please feel free to correct me. Nadia and her team will be here to share and present around the modified consent decree. Hi, welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having us this evening. I'm Nadia Madan-Morrow. I'm the Chief of Academics, and I'm here with Adrian Endries, our Executive Director of our Multilingual Education Department. Want to thank you so much for having us here this evening. Just asking for this presentation really does show your commitment to serving the multilingual learners here in Denver. So we are here today to share an overview of the consent decree, give you a little bit about the history, and just give you an overview of what is in the consent decree. So wanted to make sure that everybody knows that we are very proud that we serve the largest number of multilingual learners in the state of Colorado. As Dr. Marrero always says, we're #1 for a reason. Here's another reason why we're #1. We are also incredibly proud of the diversity that we have here in Denver Public Schools. We serve over 34,000 multilingual learners. Our multilingual learners speak 200 different languages. Spanish is spoken by the majority of our students here in Denver Public Schools. 1 in 3 of all of our students speak Spanish at home, and about 80% of our multilingual learners are Spanish speakers. You can see up here on the slide our top 10 languages spoken here in Denver, and you will see that the demographics in Denver have shifted some. For those of us that have been in Denver for a very long time, Vietnamese used to hold the top spot in terms of frequency of languages. It was English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. Arabic is now our third most spoken language here in DPS. And want you to see the number of languages up here that are actually spoken by our Black multilingual learners. So Arabic, Amharic, Somali, French, Tigrinya are all languages spoken by our Black multilingual learners. We have the great news is Denver and Colorado has been seen as a very welcoming place to various immigrant groups, and particularly in the far northeast region of our city and the far southeast region of the city, we welcome lots of immigrants from different parts of the world, and so we're really, really proud to show that we serve so many different language groups. There's often a misconception out there that we only serve, the consent decree is just only for Spanish speakers. And while there is a very heavy intentional emphasis on serving our Spanish speakers, want to just make sure that it is clear that our consent decree does serve all of our language learners here in Denver. And so this is really important because every single school in our system and every single classroom has multilingual learners in it. So here in Denver, we are very intentional about breaking historical patterns of inequity. And it's really important to remember that the consent decree was put in place deliberately to do just that. As we think historically in this country about systemic systems of oppression, schooling has been used historically in this country also as a form of linguistic oppression. You can hear from some of our, from different Native American families, stories of children being taken from their homes and being placed in boarding schools intentionally to stamp out their language and culture. For many of our Latina families that have been in this country for several generations, many of them have stories of being punished, sometimes physically in school, for speaking Spanish. So as we think about historical patterns of oppression or systems of oppression, we need to also think about linguistic oppression and how that has been a real force here in this country. And so consent decree is designed to help break down some of those systems and to get linguistic equity for our students. So here's a bit of a history of the consent decree in Denver Public Schools. Really started back in 1969 with the West High School walkouts. This is where we had our predominantly Latina, Chicano students that attended West High School that walked out demanding, with a series of demands that included linguistic demands and wanting to see themselves, their cultures represented in the curricula taught in schools, seeing teachers represented that represented them. Denver Public Schools was first taken to court in 1973 in the Keys versus School District Number 1 case, where we were found to be in violation of unconstitutionally segregating our schools by race. The Congress of Hispanic Educators then took Denver Public Schools to court in 1980, also claiming that DPS was violating the rights of our what was at the time called limited English proficient students, and requiring that additional services be placed in schools to support our students. So you can see that we've been taken back to court several times. In 1995, we were taken, busing formally ended here in Denver Public Schools. We had the same judge over the consent decree that was over the order that mandated busing. The judge at the time, Judge Mainch, thought that we had enough structures in place to continue to integrate our schools by race. But they said that we still didn't have the right services in place to meet the needs of our language learners. And so busing was lifted here in DPS, but the consent decree requirements for the linguistic needs of our students stayed in place. So the consent decree really stayed in place from 1995. The most recent version of this consent decree was negotiated in the 2012-2013 school year. So the consent decree is a federally mandated court order. We have two key plaintiffs in the case. The original plaintiffs, the Congress of Hispanic Educators, or CHE, and the Department of Justice. The consent decree has over 300 requirements in it, and it is intentionally designed to go across our systems, to permeate our systems, to make sure that a lens on our multilingual learners is embedded in all we do here in Denver Public Schools. Also, it's really important to note that we view the consent decree as the floor. These are the basic minimum requirements that we need to implement to meet the needs of our multilingual learners. It's not the ceiling. This is the floor and minimum requirements. So now I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne Endries, our Executive Director of Multilingual Education, who's going to walk you through the actual requirements of the consent decree.
Thanks, Nadia. Thanks for having us here, board members. It is a pleasure to join you this afternoon. So the first thing I really want to name for you is that the priorities as they are written are designed to incorporate what our consent decree requires. So like Nadia is saying, the consent decree permeates everything that we all do in our jobs, not just our department. We even have in this is priority, I wrote it down, 1C, specifically names, dismantling persistent and enduring systems of oppression by fully implementing our consent decree requirements. So it's right there, we are all committed to it. So I'm gonna talk high level about what we are ensuring through the consent decree, and then I'll actually walk you through chapter by chapter. So our consent decree ensures that our multilingual learners are correctly identified, placed with trained teachers, and are receiving program services in alignment with their requirements and their parents' choice. This includes dedicated English language development, integrated content language development, and bilingual programming. It ensures that multilingual learners are acquiring both language and content, that their teachers, paraprofessionals, principals, and all of their evaluators receive ongoing training, and that curricular resources are designed for MLLs and available in both English and Spanish. And it ensures that the families of our multilingual learners are engaged and informed in a language they understand, and that they have consistent access to interpretation and translation. So these are our three big buckets from the 10 chapters of our consent decree. The next slide, I have to warn you, my daughter helped me animate. She said, "Mom, your slides are kind of boring." So this one has a little pop. She's a proud DPS fourth grader. Stay tuned. Oh, it didn't happen. This must be PDF'd. I'm sorry, I'll get you the Google version. Every single one flies in a different way. Sorry for the lift up and then the breakdown. So it's very exciting. All right, let's get into these chapters. So chapter 1 defines our instructional services. So this includes bilingual programs, dedicated language development, integrated language development, and the services we provide to our newcomer and students with interrupted formal education. It talks about the curriculum, the materials, and the staffing requirements, including teachers, paraprofessionals, supplemental staff, and all of the courses that our leaders and teachers have to take. Chapter 2 talks about our instructional services advisory teams. You may have heard them called ISA teams. Each school has one of these. A school leader and staff members serve on this team and are trained annually to make sure that students are placed, identified, progress monitored, redesignated, that they're moving through the program at an adequate pace. And we have a team in our department that provides oversight to these teams, ensuring that student data is being looked at intentionally with integrity and that we're making the right choices for our students. Chapter 3 has a very long title that I will let you read. This title is largely about parent communication and screening and placement of students. So this title really hits on translation and interpretation for families, the absolute essential right that all of our students and families have to being communicated with in a language that they understand. It also talks through how students are provisionally placed. When a student has a language other than English at home, we place them into program services while they are being formally identified so they don't miss a day of those programming services while the ISA team is doing its work. Chapter 4 outlines how students are redesignated and exited from the program. So when a student meets a threshold on their English language proficiency test and has a body of evidence of their academic work that shows they are meaningfully participating in class, they are able to be redesignated from the program, which means they no longer are required to have program services, but during those 2 years, we are monitoring them to make sure they are still continuing to keep up with their coursework and make academic growth. If during that time they are not, we are able to put them back in program services to ensure they have those linguistic supports that they still need. Chapter 5 outlines personnel and training. So we have training requirements for pretty much everyone in the district. All of our teachers are designated and have between 1 and 2 years of training, depending on what their role is and how they're designated. Our school leaders, our paraprofessionals, and all of their evaluators are trained, and these trainings align to requirements in the consent decree around best practices for multilingual learners. It's embedded in LEAP, it's embedded in LEAD, it is really permeating all of our systems. Chapter 6 gets into there's only 10 chapters, don't worry guys. Chapter 6 gets into parental oversight. So this really talks about how we're engaging our families at both the school and the district level. So families have a right to be informed, again, in a language they understand. They have a right to bring concerns about their students' education, their programming, their support at a school and district level. So we provide supports for these groups to be able to engage their families. Interpretation and translation is critical in these spaces. And so we have done a lot of work in recent years to make sure that is happening in all of our schools and in all of our larger district spaces. Chapter 7 outlines our considerations for students who are receiving special education or 504 services to make sure that they not only receive those services, but let me reframe that they receive those services and their language services, and that those services consider their linguistic needs, so that they're really getting the full package and not separating out their needs into buckets. They're supporting the whole student. Chapter 8 outlines our obligation to charter schools and how we support them. So we collaborate closely with our portfolio management team to ensure our students are receiving adequate services through their charter school. So part of that is their ELA program review is part of all charter renewal decisions. So we take into consideration what that looks like for all of our charter schools as well. Chapter 9 talks about our accountability. So we are continuously monitoring ourselves and continuously being monitored on the 300 requirements that we're talking through now and that Nadia mentioned. So determining whether our programs are effective, looking at students' long-term academic programming, and we're regularly reporting on this to our external stakeholders, as well as reporting on this to our schools so that they can make real-time adjustments and continue to improve their services. Chapter 10 talks about how we remedy non-compliance, the standards and procedures around that, and how we coordinate site visits with our external stakeholders on a regular basis. So those are all the 10 chapters. I'm gonna take a breath. Now, we have quite a bit of oversight for our consent decree. So we have a lot of external oversight. So our plaintiffs, the Congress of Hispanic Educators, the Department of Justice, as well as an independent court monitor are frequent visitors to our department and to our schools. And we share reports with them quarterly to update them on progress, to look at data, to show who's in the buildings, who are our students, who are our teachers. They also regularly write to us with concerns that we respond to and make sure we are getting closer to meeting all of those 300 requirements. We also have a bit of oversight internally. Each of our schools are evaluated annually on an ELA program review. So this looks at those 3 buckets we talked about at the beginning. So how students are placed into their program, how they're monitored, what their educational experience looks like, bilingual programming, dedicated language development, content language development, and how families are engaged in the process along the way. So we're evaluating those at each school each year. And when a school is not meeting in any of those buckets, they have a service plan that we work with them throughout the year to remedy, to make an improvement in that space. And it is part of their lead rating for our school leaders. So really, again, permeating all of our systems. So it's not just another thing, it's part of what we do every day. So this is where we started, our 3 big buckets. I won't read them again, but just to name for you how these 3 pieces come through those 10 very detailed chapters and the commitment that we have to our language learners. And want to say, I know Nadia said it at the end of hers too, but this is the floor for us, and we are always pushing ourselves and our schools and our students to do more and be better for our multilingual learners. We all wear buttons that say, soy bilingüe, what's your superpower? I know, I'm like, why am I wearing, I know, next time. But it is a superpower, and we're so proud to be working with and working for our multilingual learners every day in Denver Public Schools. So thank you for your time, and Nadia and I are here to answer any questions.
Great.
Well, I wanted to say really quickly, go back a slide to the Sealy by Literacy. So this is the epitome. This is our goal, right? We want every single DPS student to walk across that stage having earned the seal of biliteracy. We're getting better at it every year. We finally broke the 1,000 mark last year. So 1,000 of our graduates graduated with the seal of biliteracy. So this is the goal. So when we say floor, not ceiling, that's more of the ceiling. That's what we're shooting for. So now we can open up for questions.
Well, Miss Nadia, on that note, what has your team had a chance to discuss that next goal and sort of a plan on reaching whatever that next goal is past the 1,000 mark?
So yeah, the goal is every single DPS student will walk across that stage with the seal of biliteracy. And so we've done a lot of work expanding dual programming across the city. We're up to 15 dual language schools now of alignment, so that we have vertical alignment K-12, so students are able to continue their language progression as they move up. We're working on developing Arabic services, so our Arabic students have the ability to be able to walk across that stage, having earned the seal of biliteracy. So our ultimate goal is every DPS graduate one day would have a seal of biliteracy.
And I would name that for this year, too, of those 1,000, 2/3 of them are current or former multilingual learners. So the program is really serving them to earn that goal.
And then my question is around these early chapters, you talking about instructional services, the training for teachers and other staff. Does that include cultural training to go with that? You know, as myself being bilingual, having been raised in Denver as an immigrant, what I noticed was every now and then there'd be a white teacher who would be somewhat bilingual in Spanish, but wasn't really connecting with my family and my parents culturally. And so I'm wondering, what does that look like when we're training and providing the instructional services to our staff in terms of culture?
That's a good question. Yeah, we do have in both our teacher qualification and our new leader courses a whole section on education and what that looks like in a classroom. We have worked a lot with our CRE team in the district and with I'm forgetting a team name, some other teams in the district to make sure that those resources are up to date and responsive and in line with the latest research, so that we're not having that same experience that you had as a student. So some of that looks like making sure that we're in those spaces talking about all of the different cultures our students bring, and even when you don't share that culture, how you are able to learn about it and welcome it and have it be a part of your classroom and part of your space. I think the other thing I would name is our Spanish language proficiency exam for ELA S teachers has gotten considerably more rigorous in recent years. So there was certainly a time when a teacher, well, I don't want to say that. I understand that I've had that same experience when a teacher said they are bilingual, and it hasn't really felt that way. And they certainly haven't felt bicultural. So through that exam, we are really getting teachers to a place where they have a near native-like fluency. And so they've spent time in cultures and places where they're able to connect more deeply with their students.
Great. Let me open it up to my colleagues. Vice President Anderson.
I have a few questions, just so brace yourselves. First, can you provide more details on what the screening process is for students and who is involved? Number two, how engaged and informed are parents in that process? Number three, what strategies does this department use to engage experts, not experts on paper, but experts in experience in the strategic process? What are the graduation rates for those who have addressed these services, who have accessed these services, excuse me, and how is that tracked and monitored? Who are your external stakeholders? I see Che is often represented, which I'm super proud of. What groups representing students of Black or African descent are also represented in these conversations? Is there somewhere where parents, students, and community can see a rubric for the evaluation? Two more. And is there a feedback loop if parents and community see blind spots of in any of these processes? And why do we have Department of Justice oversight? Is that a part of the court order? And if so, what have they said about our work?
So I just want to reiterate, I do have a long agenda to get through, but if you could answer a couple of those questions, and Vice President Anderson, if we can collect some questions and send them over to the team and get those back to us through our Deputy Chief of Staff, Deborah Staten. But if you could just in a nutshell, at least answer a couple of those, because I've got colleagues here to my left that have some questions as well.
I didn't quite hear the first question. Could you reread the first question?
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you provide more details on what the screening process is for students?
That's what
Who
I
is
thought.
involved and how engaged and informed are parents in that process?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. It starts when students register in our schools. So at the time of registration, part of the registration packet includes what's called a home language questionnaire. So it's asking 3 questions about, is another language spoken by anybody in the home? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, a student is automatically designated as provisional, which means the second they walk into our classroom, they need to be receiving services. So students out the gate are getting services until we decide that they don't need to. So they're provisional. So once they come into classrooms, there's 2 sets of screening. The first is all students take what's called the WAPT assessment, which is looking at their level of language proficiency. And then the ISA team has to collect additional pieces of a body of evidence, which includes an additional speaking sample from students and an additional writing sample. Doesn't happen. So the ISA team then sits down with the WAPT scores plus the additional pieces of body of evidence, and then they make a decision: does the student need services, or is the student what's called proficient upon entry?
Move closer to
Move closer. Okay. Proficient upon entry, which means the student may speak another language at home but doesn't require services at that time. Families then get a formal notification. Processes happen to say your student has been formally identified. We highly encourage ISA teams to be talking to families during this process to make sure that that's part of the body of evidence that students do require services. So that was the screening question. I think the question was about who are our external stakeholders. So chapter 6 talks about PACs and DACs. So every school is required to have a parent advisory committee or a PAC. This is family engagement that is intentionally designed for our families of multilingual learners. So speaking as somebody that immigrated here as a child, my parents' experience in a school system in a different country is very, very different from here, right? So our families of multilingual learners have additional questions about what are the language services my student is getting, but also how do schools work in this country, right? How do I access interpretation services? All of those additional questions. So every school is required to have a PAC, and monthly at the district level, we have a DAC that is also convening the families of multilingual learners. So we are very, very proud that every month at the DAC, we have at least 10 languages represented. Hats off to our multilingual communications team, who do a phenomenal job providing interpretation services in 10 or in sometimes more languages in those meetings. And I'm not auditory, so I've lost all of the other questions you asked.
I emailed them over to Chief of Staff Staten, so she will get them to you so that I can get those answers. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. We have Director Quattlebaum.
Yeah, so I first wanted to say thank you for the presentation. I believe, and I've said it on many things, that it's important for us to bring information to community in a way that is palatable, right? The way that we can understand it. So I just want to thank you for the very thoughtful breakdown of what the modified consent decree is so that everyone can understand it. And the second is less to you all, but kind of is, but putting it to my board colleagues that we see you again where we can really dive into what the data looks like and making sure that the picture that we're painting is supported by the data, or should I say that the data and the picture the actions actually represent what it is we're trying to achieve. And I appreciate the goal of every student being biliterate because in most countries outside of the United States, it is a requirement that every student that goes through the educational system speak more than one language. So for Denver Public Schools to be the leader in this nation on that, I don't necessarily think that that is a lofty goal. I think it's an attainable goal. So I applaud you all for setting that bar where it should be.
Question.
Director Lindsay?
Yeah, I'm assuming that you guys had a lot of disruptions for services during the pandemic. And I'm just curious to know, have you been able to reestablish those to where you can equitably cover all 10 of these chapters? Or are you still fighting to do that?
So students continued to receive services through the pandemic. And so ISA teams continued to convene, they continued to make decisions. We continued to host pack and deck meetings. So in terms of meeting continuing to implement our services during the pandemic, we did do that. However, we know that our kids were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, right? And we know that learning a language is very much a social exercise, and that really does require being able to turn and talk to your neighbor, to be able to say, what did the teacher say? What am I supposed to get? Like, there's a lot of those additional supports that students provide one another in a classroom setting that we just could not replicate virtually. So students did receive ELD, students did receive bilingual program services, but we can see in our outcomes that there was a disproportionate impact on our students.
That's it for my colleagues, right? No? Okay, Director Olson, and then we'll go to you.
Sorry, I thought you were have a comment, and I do. I'm so glad that my board colleagues have enjoyed this presentation. I've been talking about this for a while, as I knew that we needed to have this come forward for the board and for the community. And I'd just like to thank you too for being here today and for the awesome biliteracy conference. It was over 200 teachers that attended, 300. Oh, I was able to stay the whole day. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I know, Madam President, to your question about the cultural competency, the culturally and linguistically diverse learner certification that the state of Colorado offers, we offer that training as well. And a piece of that is culturally diverse learners as well as linguistically diverse. And I'd love to talk more about that because that's actually what I teach at DU. So
Yeah, and do we have, do we have percentages of who is participating in that training?
yes.
In terms of teachers and staff?
That's a condition of employment here in Denver Public Schools. So to be able to get your ELA E or ELA S certification here in Denver Public Schools, you must
to have
take
that.
this course.
So you either
And
get
if
it before you
students,
get
if teachers don't
Yep.
complete the coursework, they do lose their contract with their district.
So we're on it. That's why we're the leader. And I think we also need to acknowledge that Dr. Darlene Ledoux is sitting there in the back, who is now our ombudsperson, but she has been so instrumental in this work. And fun fact, 38 years ago when I started in DPS, she was the first person I met and she trained me. So I'd like to thank her and Dr. Escamilla and Dr. Orioste and Esther Romero and all of my ELA elders who have done so much work in this and helped me when the DOJ lawyers came and sat in my classroom and met with me. So I also want to reiterate a couple points that you brought out, that this work is all of us in Denver Public Schools. It's our job to uplift our multilingual learners. And as a former ELA S and ELA E teacher, you're so right that the consent decree is the floor, not the ceiling. And I think as we move forward, as I've recently had the privilege to meet with a group of moms from the West Side where I taught for so long, and they're bringing forward something about language justice that we're hoping to bring into policy governance with the help of Dr. Charles, and I know they're meeting with all of our board colleagues. And language justice refers to the right of every person to be able to speak, understand, and be understood in their preferred language which they feel most articulate and powerful. And I know that we in DPS are always working to create more multilingual spaces, and I really thank you for your vision for thinking about this as the floor and now where do we go from here. I mentioned at the last board meeting that many of our students who received the seal of biliteracy are no longer people who speak English learning another language. It's students who come to us speaking another language and learning English. And I just really commend your department for all of that. And we've even changed our name. We're no longer ELA, we're multilingual learners. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead,
Sure.
Superintendent Marrero.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, doctora Olsen, por participar en la conferencia. So thank you, Dr.
Pues de
Olsen.
nada.
She participated in the biliteracy conference when we all divided and supported during that time. We were on a bus tour, myself and several board members. In terms of the connection and the ceiling and the floor posed by Madam President, page 25, if anybody's curious, that's where you'll find biliteracy and everything that is seal of biliteracy on a strategic roadmap. But bringing it back to the annual, so because of the pandemic, to Director Lindsay's question, and the interruption and the uncertainty of where we were pleasantly surprised that we broke the 1,000 threshold in terms of those who are eligible. But that was the end statement, 1.5. So one of the reasonable interpretations calls for us to reestablish it. It has been reestablished in a realm that we've never been, in the thousands. So I'm hopeful that as we reconvene in terms of the new ends, that we can continue in this trajectory, knowing that we have to do way better than 1,000 this time around, which we are committed to do so.
Yeah, Director Quattlebaum.
Yeah, so this is just something to consider, and I don't know if it's, we need to come back to this for an actual deep dive into it. But, so my question is centered around the PACs. Like, how are they being monitored to make sure that they are achieving what they are supposed to achieve? As we know, with some of our CSCs in the schools, they're not functioning and operating the way they should be. And so my question is, what are the guardrails or the safeguards put in place to make sure that the PACs are operating the way they should be, safeguarding the integrity of the program and the student?
Was evaluated annually on the ELA program review. The third domain is looking at of PACs, but this is a great example of floor, not ceiling. So we have lots and lots of schools that are meeting the basic requirements around PACs, but could do a whole lot better in this realm. We are very excited in that we have new folks that have joined the MLE department whose primary goal is to be strengthening family engagement for our folks in every region of the city. And so we're very excited that we've got some extra folks that are going to be, this is their primary task, is helping newly arrived families to this city to be able to help them navigate the educational system and to help work on strengthening PACs.
I would just like to follow up with saying I would really like to hear more information about that. And I believe that that's something that's vital to the community to hear and understand. And it goes to accessibility and just letting community know how they can plug in, where they can plug in, and that they can.
Yeah.
And that they should.
That's great.
Director Balderman.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Marrero was saying earlier about the end statements, because I did a quick review of the reasonable interpretations that we passed in May as a board, which are the metrics for the superintendent evaluation. And just a quick scan, I came across 4 from a monitoring report perspective, reasonable interpretation 1.5 is meet all requirements of the consent decree. 1.2 is retention of multilingual learner or educators. 2.2 is percentage of schools passing program review, and then 5.7 is the CO by literacy graduates. So, and it's just something to keep in the back of our mind as we review our end statements, and then we go through the cycle of approving reasonable interpretations again. If there's metrics that are not in this first round that we want in a year from now, just something to keep in the back of our minds and make sure that we pick those up.
Yeah, really good points. Thank you for pointing that out, Director Balderman. as we bring this all back up in our work sessions. Thank you, Nadia. Give me your name again.
I'm Adrian.
Adrian. Thank you, Nadia and Adrian. We appreciate your time. Good night. So now we're going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent agenda, a voting item. And we will be holding item 9.01, approval of financial agreements for Vocational Teachers Federation, the Communication Workers of America, Colorado Federation of School Safety Professionals, Denver Federation of Paraprofessionals and Nutrition Service Worker Employees, Amalga- Amalgamated Transit Union, for discussion after the approval of the consent agenda. So with that, Ms. Atwood, we'll read the items on the consent agenda, and my colleagues can hold any item on which they would like to further discussion. Would you please review the items with us, Ms. Atwood?
Sure. 5.01, approval of the minutes from the June 9th, 2022 regular board meeting. 5.02, approval of the minutes from the June 16th, 2022 special board meeting. 5.03, approval of the gift report. 6.01, Finance and Audit Committee Citizen Member Recommendation. 6.02, Denver Scholarship Foundation Contract. 6.03, Denison MEP and Cooling Project. 6.04, District-wide Facility Master Planning Services. 6.05, Stedman Cooling and Elevator Project. 6.06, BD 2271, Glass Replacement Services. 6.07, Temp Agency Voco Vision LLC, doing business as Blazer Works. 6.08, Enrollment Vendor RFP Process and Scoring. 6.09, Construction Change Order for Montebello Campus. 6.10, Dura Sun Valley. And 9.02, Approval of the Personnel Transaction Report.
Can I have a motion to approve our consent agenda?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Atwood, would you please call roll?
Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Balderman,
Aye.
Director Esserman, Director Gaitan,
Aye.
Director Lindsay,
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Director Quattlebaum.
Aye.
Thank you, and the motion passes. With that, let me move on to the next item on the agenda. That's the approval of financial agreements. That is the Vocational Teachers Federation, Communication Workers of America, Colorado Federation of School Safety Professionals, Denver Federation for Paraprofessionals and Nutrition Service Workers, Employees, Amalgamated Transit Union. Can I have a motion to approve the financial agreements for the VTF, CWA, CFSSP, the DFN PNSE, and the ATU?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Right.
Seeing none? Oh, Vice President Anderson?
Yeah, I pulled this agenda item because I wanted to highlight the important work of our unions, especially President Bernie and Victoria for being here today, who led or were instrumental in leading their unions to getting our district to agree to $20 an hour for paraprofessionals, 21 for our sped paras, and the raises will continue to go up. And so I just wanted to take a moment to highlight that great work from the two of you and all of your other union allies and colleagues. Because of you, I have heard individuals saying that they were leaving the profession of Denver Public Schools because of the para wage, and they're coming back. They're staying on, they're continuing, they're coming, new people are coming to DPS. And so I appreciate you all for leading the fight forward, for helping us as a district be that $20 an hour beacon. And I know that it's not over, but I look forward to seeing you all back in a few years when we talk about what's next for the union. So I just wanted to take that moment to thank your hard work and for this accomplishment of getting $20 an hour for our.
Okay, let me go to Director Esserman and back to you. Director Esserman?
I want to appreciate the unions for that work, as Director Anderson did, but I also want to appreciate Dr. Marrero and his negotiation team, who worked hard to get to that point as well, to honor his commitment to make sure that we are in the top three of our neighboring and local districts, and that took some collaboration and some work together to get to that point, and to ensure also that we continue to be a district that models fiduciary responsibility and fiscal responsibility, and that we got there without doing significant harm or harm at all really to the district. And that's a testament to Dr. Marrero and his team, to our Chief Operating Officer, Jim Carpenter, and our Chief Financial Officer, Chuck Carpenter, as well. So wanted to call that out.
Great. Director Olson?
I'm echoing the same thanks from Director Anderson or Vice President Anderson and Director Esserman. The only thing I'll add is I think someone's been with our district 46 years, and I'd just like to acknowledge all of the hard work that you've put into helping us get here.
So, yeah, we won't be able to do public comment, so, but you can stand and we want to congratulate you. Okay,
Yeah, you
yeah,
should
we
go
weren't,
to-
we
walk
weren't
over to
going to
the
do
mic.
public comment though, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank you, thank you.
because we know all of these people make the school district go round. I know as a teacher, I learned as much from all of you as my students learned from me. So thank you. And I think we'll be seeing you back again in December, maybe when we might honor you for your 46 years. So thank you very much.
Teamwork, right. Thank you, thank you. Well, with that, Ms. Atwood, would you please call a roll?
Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Balderman,
Aye.
Director Esserman,
Aye.
Director Gaitan,
Aye.
Director Lindsay,
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Director Quattlebaum.
Aye.
And with that, the motion passes. Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is the presentation of the teacher dismissal recommendation by our superintendent, Dr. Marrero. To protect the confidentiality of the employee, the superintendent will share a little information about the process, but we will not discuss the contents or any facts about this recommendation. Dr. Marrero, take it away.
Yes, thank you. Board members, before you in manila envelopes, you have recommendations for teacher dismissals pursuant to Colorado Teacher Employment Compensation and Dismissal Act, CRS 22-63-302. The basis for these recommendations are described in the documents contained in the folders they have. They are confidential and should not be shared publicly. These are not to be voted on today once the teacher is afforded the full procedural rights under TECTA. This will return to you for a final vote on the recommendation.
We'll just give a few minutes here for our colleagues to review. Okay, thank you, Dr. Marrero. And with that, we have completed all public business before the Board of Education tonight. We are now going to move into executive session for the purpose of a conference with an attorney to receive legal advice on specific legal questions regarding the No Justice, No Peace trademark as authorized by CRS 24-6-4024B. And with that, I first need we're going to do a motion to adjourn and then a motion to move into executive session. So first, may I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Atwood, would you please call roll?
Director Anderson,
No, I mean, aye.
Director Balderman,
Aye.
Director Esserman, Director Gaitan, Director Lindsay,
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Director Quattlebaum.
Thank you, and this meeting is adjourned. Legal counsel, do we executive session? Okay, now we're going to do a motion. May I get a motion to move into exec? May I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Atwood, please call roll.
Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Balderman,
Aye.
Director Esserman,
Aye.
Director Gaitan,
Aye.
Director Lindsay,
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Director Quattlebaum.
Thank you. The motion passes. And we appreciate the DPS viewing audience as well. Thank you. Have a good night.
All right, that was the DPS Board of Education meeting. Yeah, we glad that we could stream that. Make sure folks are seeing what's going on. They're moving into an executive session. I was a little confused there at the end because they adjourned a meeting and then came back and made a motion to move to executive session, which you ended a meeting, then you made a motion to move to executive session in a meeting that, anyways, I just thought there were some procedural things there that could have been done differently. Anyways, a lot going on there. Most of the stuff tonight was the consent decree. You heard some the modified consent decree. So I heard a presentation on that. Saw a presentation on the from the DPS Foundation. Saw a presentation from the um, nursing staff around vaccinations, and then they're moving into executive session to talk about the No Justice, No Peace, which is a um, no justice, no peace trademark. Like, who owns that trademark, right? Those of us who live out in the far Northeast know that that was created by students as they were uh, engaged in elevating their voices to talk about the issues that were concerning they were concerned about. That included um, the inclusion of Black history in their courses, not just Black history, but um, all history, in the courses after their trip to Washington, D.C., changed their perspectives on things and helped them to see what they had not learned in their time in DPS. And they came back and they pushed that and they worked diligently for that. It birthed into a podcast that has become pretty popular. The ladies' voices, their brilliance, their images, all of that has become a staple for the No Justice, No Peace podcast. And it seems like there's a discussion here about who owns that. Is that a DPS trademark? Because, does DPS have the rights to say, hey, you created that either when you were an employee of ours or you were a student of ours, so we get to own that? Or is that something that those students and their families created while, yes, being students at Denver Public Schools? But do the students own that? Do the parents and the students own the rights to that? So that would be an interesting discussion. We're not privy to that because it's in an executive session. They're going to be talking about that with their lawyers. Um, but it's very interesting to me that there's been changes in leadership at DMLK. There's been a lot of stuff that's kind of we're not privy to as the public or as neighbors, as people who supported the school, people who've had kids at the school, not all the details have been made public. And so this is another thing that's going on that is happening behind closed doors. And we understand there's legal things that are being discussed, and that they're trying to figure that out. But I also think there's a point where you have to have some of these conversations in public, like what went down. Like we had this thing that was moving forward. Black excellence resolution passed in 2019, and then you see the no justice, no peace come a year later. So these things were kind of connected and moving and seemingly moving the agenda forward about Black excellence and transforming and improving the Black student experience in DPS. And it seems like kind of run into a I don't even know what I want to call it. You kind of run into a hurdle. And that's probably, I'm just putting that mildly. So I wish I was a fly on the wall during that executive session to hear what's going on and what they're going to say. Like, who, again, you heard what it is. It's for the purposes of getting legal counsel related to the no justice, no peace trademark. And who owns that? Is that the students and their families? Is that the students, the families, and the staff that may have guided them? Is that DPS owned now? Is that a DPS thing? Because, hey, it's our intellectual property because you created it when you were a student or staff member of DPS. Yeah, we could talk about that. We could talk about what that means to folks. Other highlights that I think tonight, I thought the presentation on the modified consent decree was important for a lot of different reasons. Right, anytime you can help to educate new members on the board, and you can help to educate community about what something really is important, and it gives folks the knowledge that they need to make better decisions and to make better analysis of what's going on. Right, so I thought that the team there definitely gave a good overview of it. I think there were some great questions that were asked by Director Anderson, um, and also Director Quattlebaum about. Let's talk about why the Justice Department is concerned about this. Let's talk about, the PACs. Like, how do we know that these PACs are functioning the way that they should? And I love I appreciated the honest, transparent response from the staff that said, look, we understand that some of these PACs are operating at the bare minimum. They're not doing what they should be fully. Like, they're doing just enough to get by. And that's why we're not seeing the outcomes and the supports that we need for students and families, is because, in a lot of places where these PACs are not functioning at the highest level that they can be, folks are just filling out the paperwork and submitting it and making sure that the bare minimum is getting done. And I appreciated the staff calling that out. Um, but that's a behavior that's got to change. And that's a behavior that can't be condoned. You can't continue to allow people to, you know, stay employed and in a position, and their lack of urgency or their lack of, concern, their just, check the boxes mentality is it's not serving kids well. It's not serving families well. So if you're really about it, then those folks can't be about it, right? I also appreciated, the questions around the president, the board president asked about cultural awareness and cultural competency, and being able to not just speak a language, but also to understand that that language is attached to a people with a culture, and a people with, you know, um, traditions, and a people with, values and principles of how we live and how we interact. And just to be able to speak a language is not enough, right? You can be bilingual and be very culturally offensive. And so being able to question that and challenge folks to say, you know how are we ensuring that these teachers who come in and we give them, oh, they're bilingual, but are they culturally competent? Are they, that's important, right? Because you can speak my language and be rude as hell, racist as hell, and I'm like, I don't really care that you can speak my language. You're offensive, right? You still have supremacy ideology, and you think that Even, I mean, that can come across. You may speak the language, but your boy is there for real. So I appreciated those pushes, and I think that's what a board's job is to pay attention to the means, the methods by which the superintendent is directing the team to achieve the goals that the board has set, and to push hard, right? And yeah, applaud and clap and celebrate where we should celebrate, but simultaneously, don't just give passes, right? Like if we want to go here, don't just be like, oh, everything's good right here. That's been the struggle is that in education spaces that mediocrity is celebrated, that mediocrity is celebrated, it's applauded, and I love they continue to say that the modified consent decree was the floor, right? So what we've been celebrating is people just doing the floor, right? What we've been applauding, what we've been saying good job to is people just doing the floor, right? And the equity need is way up here, right? But people are getting applauded for the floor, right? But we're about equity. We're about people getting what they need and the services and the supports that they need in an equitable way, but you're at the floor, right? So a lot of work to be done. I think we have to continue to push that. I was taken back by a comment from about demystifying that we're doing well, right? I said demystify what? I mean, I literally, I try not to tweet when I'm doing the board stuff, but I was like demystify what, right? I just read data that said only 24% of Black and Hispanic students are proficient in math and reading. Now, how do we demystify that is, not that bad? We're doing okay. Bro, come on. And how do I demystify that the gaps in performance are nearly 40 some percent between black and brown students and their and white peers? I don't know how you demystify that, right? And I think people when they communicate, supremacy ideology comes across when you are flippant about the fact that we're failing black and brown kids, right? When you were just like, yeah, yeah, we've got the minority kids that we're struggling with, but overall, what? I, doesn't compute for me. Doesn't compute for me. Doesn't matter what district you're talking about. Anyways, that's DPS. Other big news tonight in school board stuff. Jeffco submitted a plan tonight to talk about closing 16 schools in Jeffco schools. Going to have a process over the next 2 months where they're going to be involved in some community conversations about that. They've already started talking with principals. If you read some of the articles that Chalkbeat put out there, you got principals who have been already having these conversations with their school teams, parents, students. But it's always, hear me, it's always hard when you get some news like this because schools are communities, schools are families, right? Schools is where you do life together, and to have that disrupted, even if it makes sense, right? I appreciated one of the principals from Jeffco in an article that I read. She was just talking about, hey, and I know this for a fact, having lived this. There's a point where you're serving students, and your students need more, but there's not resources for it because the way we're funded, and even when you get support from your district around budget assistance, there's just not enough to go around to really meet those needs. And so, being able to bring some of these schools together to get to the numbers that will allow some more economies of scale will be beneficial for students in the long run. And I appreciate leaders, principal leaders in Jeffco who are like, look, we know this is not easy. And I appreciate staff in Jeffco saying, look, we know this is not easy. And I also appreciate some folks who own, like, we knew this was coming because look, every DPS and other districts do strategic analysis. They pay attention to birth rates. They pay attention to, you know, home occupancies. They pay attention to what kind of, homes are being built, and they know the yield that certain homes will, yield as far as students, right? So if you're building this kind of, if it's apartment complex, if you're building these, these single family, they know just based on, historical data, and then they project out, okay, this is the student count that we're projecting. And so then they budget based on that. And so then when you don't have those numbers, when birth rates are going down, when gentrification is happening, there's so many things that are causing these numbers to dwindle, and it's going to be rough. It's going to be a challenging time. But Jeff goes out there, kind of taking this deep dive first, and other districts are going to have to talk about it. We know that's being talked about in Aurora. That's been something that's been going back and forth with Aurora. Denver is also having these conversations, so it's something that's going to be across the education space. So pay attention to that, engage. Also, I think I'm going to jump into Aurora. I don't know if their meeting is public tonight. I think they're having a meeting too. But I've said this on my Twitter. Like I'm over personality politics on boards that continue to allow personalities to get in the way of the best decisions for students. Right? That folks are trying to flex their muscle and appear to be woke and radical by doing reckless stuff. And I think we need to pay attention to that as a general public. And when we see folks who want to project to be like woke and radical and connected to what we really want, but they're doing reckless stuff, then when we go to the ballot, we don't need to be reckless. We need to be intentional, and we need to get folks off our school boards. If they're not there for our kids, if they're not there to make sure that the best things are happening for our children, and mainly that is most boards' job is to make sure that their executive, their superintendent, is has clear goals, has clear um, supports, has clear um, understanding of when there's going to be times of progress monitoring, when there's going to be transparent evaluation of that person's work. Um, that's what we expect boards to be doing. I don't expect the circus. I don't expect you to use the board as your platform to, make your brand known or to make your name known. We don't want to know your name. We want to know if you know the names of our kids. We want to know if you know the names of, the teachers. We want to know if you understand that this isn't about you. It's about the outcomes that we are focused on for our kids. So look, that is my rundown of DPS. Talking about Jeffco, talking about what's going on in APS, and God bless you. Um, but a lot going on across the state, across the country, and those of us who are in this for kids, we've got to maintain uh, vigilant. We got to maintain, be aware, and we got to push where we need to be pushed. A lot of things happening. We'll be back another time, but on that note, have a good night. Appreciate you.